Hello there and welcome back to War Thunder, to the tank review on the T-34 prototype. Now in the beginning I want to ramble about various different aspects of the tank, some other tanks in the game, some game mechanics before I actually begin with the tank review, but I hope you don't mind because this is actually pretty interesting, at least from my perspective. So, the T-34 prototype is these days a rather rare tank, and it is pretty close in all stats to the T-34 1940, and where it differs I will tell you. And so it is a rather rare tank that was first available for entering the closed beta for tanks, and after that it was just one time more available for the 5 years of anniversary of War Thunder, where it was limited to 500 packages, and I just bought it for the relatively high price of 60 euros, but I'm an insane collector, so I didn't mind. By itself the tank is not really worth it, but it's a very important collector's item to have as a collector. And well, the T-34 is one of the most versatile tanks within War Thunder, where it combines firepower, armor and protection in a very nice blend. And it is, well, the first of the tanks in the Russian line that is kind of a where it actually, you know, is the origin of a, well, I don't know how to say it, but it is kind of a legend. That's what it is. And you know, we go from the T-34 prototype and the T-34 1940 to the 41, 42 and some other 76mm guns, to then the T-34 57 as a high velocity anti-tank gun version, which is also there in a premium version. Then also the very infamous T-34 85 D5T and some other variants of the 85mm gun with some premium tanks, or at least one. And even the T-34 100 is in the game with a 100mm gun at battle rating 6.7. You want even a bigger gun? Well, take the Tank Destroyer premium version, which is the SU-122P. Again, modified, and even the Chinese modified the hull to an anti-tank weapon called the Type 65 at battle rating 5.3, which is a reward tank, and pretty nice, I have to say. Definitely better than a ZSU-37 with a double 37mm gun and better reload. And so there you go, the T-34. And again, 3.3, it is kind of the beginning of the flavor for each nation. Think about the Sherman with the 75mm gun, or the German Panzer IV F2, where you get the actual anti-tank capabilities. Same goes for the Chinook and also the Cromwell 5. So, yeah, without further ado, I think there is one thing that I have to add here, and that is about game changes or game mechanic changes. Now in the beginning, when there was only Germany and also the Soviet Union, up to the patch 1.63, this tank was infamous of bouncing everything when you just hit the hull and you had a bad RNG roll. And that is in patch 1.63 Desert Hunters, a new game mechanic was introduced, and that was what I refer to as the 30% interaction rule. That means every tank that has sloped armor has the chance to bounce shells, but the chance of bouncing a shell is drastically reduced once the shell caliber exceeds 1.3 times the armor thickness of the tank. Now we have here a frontal plate of 45mm, and if you calculate it through, every shell that has a diameter or a full caliber greater of 58.4mm has now a drastically reduced chance of bouncing. That includes, for example, the low penetration 75mm rounds from the Sherman and the Chinook and the Panzer IV F1 and every version below that. With their armor piercing or armor piercing high explosive shells, they have a damn hard time penetrating here, but they will not bounce. So it depends then on the raw penetration power, and that makes the Panzer IV F2, you know, the F2 variant, your arch nemesis, because it actually doesn't give a damn about your armor, penetrates you, in most cases does a lot of damage to you. But every other tank, including SPA, they have a damn hard time penetrating here by shooting here randomly, and you also can angle. And that actually brings us now to the beginning of the tank review. So we begin with the armor, and as you can see, we have 45 millimeters all around at 60 degrees, and that gives an effective thickness somewhere between 85 to 95 millimeters. And we have 3 areas of weak spots. We have the machine gun port, which is flat, and we also have those parts here that are flat, and this bar here, but it's not technically the upper plate. On the 1940 variant, it is 100 millimeters thick, and it's therefore much stronger, but everything else is kind of the same. So that's one difference. The lower glacis is not that well angled, so this area here on the prototype is where you shoot, but you will not see the prototype very often. So either shoot here for the machine gun port or the turret from the front, because the turret, despite being heavily curved, has, like the mouse, you know, some flat parts here where it's just 45 millimeters thick. That also makes you vulnerable to especially German SPA. However, you have some overlay around the gun mantle where you have 90 millimeters plus, and especially if you hit here those angled parts, you can create a lot of non-penetrations and ricochets. Also, the side of the turret is also not that thin, 45 millimeters, so you can think about wiggling the hull, wiggling the tank, and then force some bounces. So at minimum it's 57 millimeters thick, so that's not that bad. The side of the hull is also 40 millimeters. Due to the angle, it's around about 50 to 55 millimeters thick, and behind the wheels and the tracks we have 45 millimeters, again because it's flat. The rear is also 40 millimeters, and the deck is between 20 and 20 plus 10 millimeters, and the rooftop is 15 millimeters, so that's vulnerable to 50 caliber fire from planes that dive in a steep angle. And well, that then leads us to the X-ray. Now we have 4 crew members, but 2 of them, which is quite unusual, are down in the hull with the machine gunner and the driver. So you actually can survive a turret penetration, but then you are down to 2 crew members after you lose 2. And yeah, the gun breech looks rather big, but the majority is here protected by the gun mantle, so you do not really get hit here that often. And look at where the ammunition is. We have here around about 12 rounds that are where the driver and where the gunner and the loader are sitting. So take out 12 rounds, and the remaining shells are here in the bottom, where they are protected by being relatively low in the tank. Not a lot of people are shooting here. The fuel tank will absorb a lot of shrapnels and sometimes even entire shells. The tank is still famous for it. And you know, there are some additional wheels and the tracks here to protect them a little bit. And the power pack, consisting of the transmission and the engine, radiators, and the other fuel tanks, is in the back of the tank. So the tank is pretty solid. It is actually a very nice design, and it proves itself on and on since the beginning up until now within War Thunder. So now let's have a look at some other statistics. Out of the 3 very important parts that a tank should combine, you know, mobility, firepower, and armor protection, we talk about here the mobility first, and we can see we have the 2nd strongest engine, and we are not the heaviest tank, giving us the 2nd highest horsepower to ton ratio of 19.5. Just the Cromwell is a bit better, and we have, well, a 1/3 more horsepower to ton ratio than the most of our competitors, and the top speed of 54 kilometers an hour is also pretty good. Just the T-34 1940 actually has a top speed of 49 because the engine doesn't rev as high, but the reverse speed of -8 kilometers an hour is also the same. So while -8 is not glorious, as you can see, it is still the 2nd fastest reverse gear, and it also doesn't have neutral steering, but that doesn't really matter because of the high horsepower to ton ratio. You actually can kick the tank around quite comfortably, and the tracks provide you with excellent traction on all terrain, and that gives you the relatively low ground pressure, and so low ground resistance stats, and that allows you to actually reach your top speed even on medium terrain, and you can easily climb hills and, you know, just move around on the battlefield, and that makes the tank really, really great. And now let's talk about the firepower. And the firepower is where at first the tank doesn't look that good when it comes to the gun handling, because for having the highest caliber by 1mm we pay a lot for it, for having this L11 gun. We have the longest reload with 7.1 seconds for an A screw. A lot of the competitors, the P40 Leoncello, the M4A1 Sherman and the Cromwell, have 2.1 second faster reload. That's nearly a third. And even tanks like the Chinook and the Panzer IV F2 have 6.0 seconds or less. And just the MX-13 FL11 has a longer reload than you, and something like the Panzer IIIM actually has nearly double the rate of fire. So you really feel that on the battlefield. However, the rest is again an up and down. You have the faster turret rotation speed, but you have the worst gun depression, but the best gun elevation and the best elevation speed. So that's quite significant. So the actual gun handling on the majority of battlefields of War Thunder is pretty good. The reload is long, but the first shot, you can swing the turret around pretty fast, you can actually shoot at aircraft, and you have the fastest elevation speed, so you are just 50% faster in doing so, and you really feel that also in stabilizing the gun. So in this matter it's actually not that bad. But what actually is also pretty bad is then the ammunition. At least at first, because while the BR350A with the MD5 use, which is very interesting, has a low penetration value of 73, which actually puts it below the P40's Granata Perforante, which is an APC-BC round. Here we have an APHE-BC round, and this is where kind of the weird magic of Russian tanks start. Now, I do not insert here Russian bias or something, but the APHE-BC shell type is unique to the Russians, and it is very good at penetrating angles and slopes. So you might think, oh, I cannot pen this due to my slow or my low penetration values, but you actually can. But then there is another issue. While we have 150 grams of TNT filler, which is just second to the, again, Granata Perforante of the P40, the Leoncello, that is enough to kill every tank with one shot. Except that most of the time you don't, because we have a very good fuse sensitivity, but the fuse delay is just 15 centimeters, and that is practically exploding right after it penetrates the armor. And so if you penetrate a turret, it doesn't splash backwards like with any other APHE round in the game, and this is a real drawback. So you actually have to aim for the hull so it can splash up in the turret, and it makes it really strange sometimes, because you think, oh, well, now I have the shot at the tank, and you kill the gunner, and then you cannot kill him again with the second follow-up shot, but your reload is not fast enough to kill him before he gets replaced for the second time, and then you receive the return shot, which most of the time, when aimed well, at the turret at least, does damage and knocks you out. So this is actually a pretty big drawback. But that is the shell that I use for 95% of my shots. As a tier 2 upgrade, you have the BR350SB AP-BC shell, and that is thanks to the armor-piercing spalling buff that with the French got introduced in the game, is now actually an alternative to maybe finish off a tank, or shoot through the rear of a tank, through the engine, and kill the entire crew without having to aim for the turret. It's a situational shot. Maybe you use it as your very next shot, because it just offers you a few more millimeters of penetration, and I do not really see that much use for it. Again, it's situational. It's like with the very same difference between the AP and the APHE shot of the Sherman. And it doesn't have the argument of having really high penetration than the AP shot on the Sherman. So it's an option. It's a tier 2 upgrade. You get it really quickly, and that's not a problem, at least on the Tech Tree version. Now here we have now a funny dualism between the HE shell, which has 9mm of penetration, which is not that impressive, and you cannot really use it in the majority of cases except against some AAA vehicles or SPAs of the enemy because of the lack of a heavy machine gun. Now remember, 9mm of penetration. That's not very good. I think the Chinu has 11, but that's also not that spectacular. However, very unique to the Russian low-tier tanks, we have here a Shrapnel Shell, the SH-354T, and it has a fuse sensitivity of 8mm. So everything that you cannot kill with your HE shell because it doesn't penetrate the armor, you have a higher chance of penetrating it with half the penetration values of the AP HE BC round, in fact, and your fuse delay then, you know, spreads the 85 grams of explosive mass around with huge shrapnels, and that's actually the crew killer that is very spectacular. But most of the time, again, your APHE BC round will do the job. Now, if we compare here the ammunition and its values, we can see that the APHE round or the APHE BC round in this comparison has by quite some bit the lowest penetration values, but it has a very good TNT filler. The HE shell is not very spectacular, and also we don't have any sort of APCR. I just put in here the AP shot as APCR, and that makes the tank not that very good, if not for the very good normalization values of the APHE BC round. So where very often other tanks might bounce at extreme angles against thin armor, this shell will enter. And we also have no heat round like the P40 Leoncello or the Panzer IV F2. So you kind of see the tank stat-wise is an up and down. At some points we are very good when it comes to the mobility and the overall armor, but then again the firepower with the reload and, you know, gun depression is very bad, but then the rest of the gun handling is very good. Effectively on the battlefield, it means you can sometimes take a shot, you are not that vulnerable to SPA compared to other tanks, but you are not invulnerable, but you have sometimes more difficulties dealing with them. And I think now it's time for some action-packed gameplay. I hope you enjoy. So before I go to the last gameplay, I actually wanted to show this scene, and in the bottom right corner you actually can see the replay, and I have here the markers on so you can see what's actually coming. To my right I spotted a tank, and I actually wanted to, well, kill him, and I needed to reposition, but gladly I looked around and I saw this M4A3 105, and I killed him. And then I realized, oh boy, there are so many more tanks. I tried to reverse and I tried to angle myself, and I actually hit here the M3 Lee, and you can see how big the damage is inside of the tank when you hit it for good. Usually you need a lot of ammunition to take an M3 down, and now I finished him off, and now I get shot. I lost my driver, it get replaced, and I kill here, or I damage here another Sherman, and there is another Sherman. So a lot of action right at the start. I was so fast in position, like with just a few other tanks, but I have the armor, I have the survivability, and I have the firepower to go through this. And they just come like lemmings all sideways on, and this rock here is my best friend now. Now you can see it here in the camera in the bottom right. I have some support by a few Panzer IVs, and their 75mm guns make no prisoners indeed. So I have the fire support, and I still get all the kills that I want. Beautiful side shot here, multi-strike ×4, I bounce another shot, but now there is a Sherman behind me, and now after the multi-strike 5 I realize something's there, and I don't really realize where it is because I'm preoccupied with all the tanks in front of me. I kill here a Matilda 2 through the turret, and then I see him, but then it's too late and I got killed. Do you remember the 25 degrees of gun elevation? He does. So another scene, actually I couldn't resist to show that to you, is right at the start we go in, and it's again about the very, very aggressive playstyle that you can achieve with this tank. And look at the speed, how we accelerate here on this terrain. It's not that spectacular because we have to turn quite a bit, and we also are going through mud at parts, which I just hate about a city map. If there's mud on the city streets, I cannot stand this. So at this point I think to myself, well, when can I launch the artillery strike? And I go between the caps. So I think around about now would be a good time to launch the artillery strike. Yep, the accuracy is good. The closer you get to the artillery strike position, the better is the accuracy. We look into the spawn, or in the cap rather. And what is that? Well, double strike. That was really, really nice. And there is now an Achilles, I guess, or an M10. And there you can see the shell, how it works. Devastating damage output, triple strike. It was in fact an M10, and I bounced a shell from, well, a Sherman, and we again shoot right at the edge. There is now a Churchill coming in. There is another tank on their spawn. I always say spawn, I mean capture zone. And I'm not quite sure what to do, and I get shot from the rear, and before I can completely reverse into cover, my driver and my machine gunner gets taken out. I have no chance of killing the enemy, and I get taken out by a Valentine Mark 9. And those were 4 intensely fast kills just a few minutes into the gameplay. So, and this game here on Frozen Pass is the one that I picked for, you know, the last game. And actually I just let it roll and ramble on a little bit. And you know, it's a straightforward flanking maneuver. There is just A in the top right corner of the minimap. And so I flank the enemy by going through the middle. Now the big bulk of my team is actually going for A. But it's really important, especially at lower battle ratings, to clean up the flank, because there are always some filthy, dirty seal clubbing tanks, or you know, new players that have seen a video and want to exploit the flanking tactic, and you have to clean them up, because your team actually has always a very good chance in a head-on fight in general, but is always very vulnerable from flanking attacks, you know, a lack of armor, a lack of situational awareness, and that is true for all nations. First customer of the day, and there we have the problem with the short fuse. So it's sometimes really difficult to finish off a tank in one shot. There we actually had the very good spot to shoot. The short fuse is the problem. You have all the TNT equivalent filling that you need. You have the caliber, but it's that short fuse that gives you that really weird hash-like spalling spraying pattern. And that is really a problem with this tank. Now that is the MD5 fuse. The MD8 fuse on the T-34 1941 actually solves this problem, and you just then have to switch between the two shells, whatever you prefer, and still the MD8 fuse has enough filler to deal with the opposition. There you can see again a turret hit, and I didn't kill off the Panzer IV because there are 2 crew members in the hull, so it needed a side shot, and that was kind of a roadkill because I wanted to flank and kill the first Panzer VF2 that received the very first shot with a turret hit. So, as you can see, thanks to Gaijin's fantastic map design, this little flanking action actually puts me in the vicinity of the enemy's spawn zone. I'm not a dirty, filthy, you know, spawn camper early on. I take that for the rest of the match when I have cleared out the flank. And I thought I could kill him there, but the shell actually dips into the rock, which lets me look like a fool, but this guy actually gives me the time to reload. He was so afraid, he pointed his gun there, and that was I was worried about. I respect the German 75mm gun at that battle rating. It really hurts. I think the Panzer IV F2 is the very best Panzer IV F2 because the armor really never matters. However, thanks to the lack of armor, but with the same engine power equipped like later variants, and you know, the firepower also never changing, I think the F2 variant is just simply the best to use in the current meta of War Thunder, and so you have to respect that gun. So now I'm, you know, already going here in through the middle, going forth and back. So the actual thing about the T-34 is that it is straightforward, it supports aggressive playstyle, you get the kills early on, you make a decisive impact, and even though you get killed, it doesn't really matter because you have enough spawn points for another medium tank, maybe a heavy tank, or a light tank, or an SPA, or then even a plane and whatnot. So you can really have this snowball effect, and the beginning of the snowball effect with this tank due to the mobility, due to the firepower and the damage output. Yes, it has some drawbacks, but as you can see, the armor works, the mobility works, and the firepower eventually will also work. Now there are tanks that give you some sort of problems. Amongst them are German SPA because of the weird game mechanic. And there you can see the shell just the damage pattern was absorbed by one of the 4 gun breaches, so the gunner survived, and I had to finish him off with a machine gun bullet through the front of the aiming reticle, I guess, where he looks like it was a counter sniper. So I needed quite some more ammunition than I expected because I couldn't shoot the hull. Shoot the hull of enemy tanks. Shoot at the rounded parts of the hull of a Sherman, or just where the rudder hatches on a Panzer IV, and you most likely will always have a one-shot. You have the TNT equivalent, but it's really the short fuse. Again, have I mentioned it with the MD5 and the MD8 fuse on the T-34 41 that actually solves this problem, because there you have a longer fuse delay. So it's not the fuse sensitivity but the fuse delay. Securing our 6th kill with a machine gun, and on we go. So my team is already looking around on the enemy spawn. We have secured the only capture zone and the enemy team is boxed in. Nothing more to talk here about really. Wasting a bit of time trying to shoot at aircraft. I really have to say this 25 degrees of elevation is quite nice when you want to shoot at aircraft. It's just exactly that kind of 5 degrees that you're missing with other tanks. Although, you know, you're missing the heavy machine gun. There's always, any tank has some sort of negative part that you can complain about. But again, I think every tank at 3.3 has some special flavor, has something going for it. The Cromwell has the mobility and the rate of fire. The T-34 has the combination of the perfect blend of the armor, the mobility, and the firepower, but lacks the gun depression and the rate of fire compared to other tanks. The Panzer IV F2 has actually the firepower and still decent mobility. So all those 3.3 tanks by themselves are fun to play. And the Sherman, it has the very first version of a stabilizer, it has the rate of fire, it has a heavy machine gun. So yeah, then I think after this tank review there is just the P40 Leoncello to cover, which is quite an interesting tank, I have to say. And I think I take it for last because of, the Italian tanks not being that urgent. I mean, it's just 2 premiums at the moment. Hopefully this will change in the near future, but I think other projects of Gaijin are more urgent at the moment, I guess. So, and at this point, what can you do? It's a small map. Map design is crap. We have the capture zone. There's nothing left to do. I am spawn camping. So at this point, it looks like we have already secured we have killed them all basically, and so one of them of course is respawning, and we have to deal with this in just a moment. And there he is. Now it's those moments where I really have to ask myself, what do you actually comment here? Because nothing to do, right? So I think the sound here is a little bit off. Not quite sure. I had to correct it 2 times already in the editing. Sometimes the audio and the video are kind of desynchronized throughout the video, so not just a single correction makes it. And he respawns again in a backup, and so I have to really ask myself, is that really that useful? He doesn't get a kill, he wastes a backup, and well, I guess I have to thank him, because that then secures me just in a moment the double ace. So some of those kills obviously were flanking kills, some of them were quote-unquote spawn camping, but again it is down to how a match evolves, how often you actually can shoot the enemy, how often they respawn, and all those things. So I think that was a pretty nice outcome. 10 kills, survivor, mission marker, that's quite an income. And you know, don't forget that this tank has the premium status. So now let's have a look at the results of this, well, double ace. Now we can see actually that's not that bad. 48,000, 49,000 silver lines and nearly 5,000 research points for a tank that sits at battle rating 3.3. That's quite nice. And yeah, we were second in team with 2,100 score points. That's it for me today. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Sorry about this long review, but I thought it would be worth watching. And yeah, let me know what you think about this tank. Would you like to have it? Is it a novelty? Or are you saying, well, the normal T-34 1940 is copy-paste basically? Let me know. Anyways, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Please give this video a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the battlefields of War Thunder.